that how many had that kind of honor, if you will.
Yeah.
But Peter did.
Yo. Oh, there it is. Boom. Welcome back, bro.
Welcome back to the show. About Peter Francisco.
Mega pints of coffee.
Mega pints.
Which is the same as a pint, by the way. You
Is
just
it really?
put the word mega in front of it.
Really?
But yeah, because if it was different, then it would be something else than a pint. It'd be like a liter.
Now I'm disappointed because I thought my mega pint was something bigger.
I know.
Something gigantic.
It's a
or
pint
something.
just in a bigger glass. Maybe that's what a mega pint is.
You know,
I don't know. Johnny Depp, care to weigh in on this?
That's right. Johnny, come on. I mean, you know, as big as Peter Francisco was in his day,
he definitely
had to have drank a mega pint.
Well, that mug would be the minimum that he would probably drink out of.
Exactly. And that's why we're drinking.
That's right.
Shoot. So people always ask, Peter Francisco, then after the American Revolution, what happened?
What happened?
Then what?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a guy who obviously kidnapped at the age of 5,
Right.
grew up on a plantation as a worker, and didn't go to school, right? Didn't have any skills other than his size and whatever he learned on working on the plantation, which I'm sure was skill-wise a lot. He was a trained blacksmith, right?
Blacksmith, yep. Sure.
But as far as formal education went, he had none of that.
None
Didn't
of
know
that.
how to read, didn't know how to write, which, you know, when you become a grown man and then you've won your freedom and you're off in the real world, doesn't serve you very well. So
Right.
we're now at the point where he's done fighting. The war is over. What happens? I mean, where do you go with no real world skills, I guess?
So what's wild is he is like crazy famous after the American Revolution. He was such a big dude. There was always a legend. We obviously on the previous episode we were talking about him picking up a cannon, and still 200 years later that's on a stamp.
Right.
So there was legends and stories told about him for years.
Right.
You know, long after the American Revolution, and then that's recorded history. Newspapers were still writing articles about him. Paintings were done, of him. Many of the plantation homes actually had famous paintings of Peter Francisco hanging in their living rooms, and so he was legendary in his day. He was like a rock star. I mean, you think of Steven Tyler. Think of the legendary rock stars in his day. So he was always invited to big parties. Whether it's George Washington's home or, So there was always, a party of dignitaries, and we'll just make sure Peter Francisco's on the list. The funny thing is that the stories were that he inevitably at these parties he would like break out into song. So I guess he was really good singer. I don't know.
Wow.
So Brian, we expect you to sing a song.
Yeah, well, gonna have to get on some lessons before I do. Before I just break out in song. Listen, I fully believe one of my favorite just God-given abilities is people who can sing, that have that talent to just get up there and just rip, right? And I've always loved that. My baby sister, who has since gone to be with the Lord, she was an amazing singer, amazing, and it was just out of the box that way. Like she was just born with. I mean, my mom, she can hold a note. My dad can hold a note, but no one in our family is like a gifted singer. My baby sister, Julie was her name. She just a gifted singer. The Lord just blessed her with an amazing voice. Yeah. And I mean, I can hold a tune for sure, but that's
better than some, because some people, you sing with them next to the church, and you're like, Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
You may make it
those
quiet
are
down over
typically
there.
some of the loudest singers.
Right.
But I fully believe that the good Lord did not bless me with that talent because I would totally abuse it. I would be one of those people, if I could sing, like really sing, like throw down.
Throw down?
I'd be at a restaurant and all of a sudden I would just be like, I would stand up and just be like, everybody,
I got a song to sing for you.
Listen to this. See how good I am.
See how good I am.
And I would just totally abuse that gift. And the good Lord is like, you're not. There's no way I'm giving that to you because you will totally use that for the wrong purposes.
We'll just give you all the strength. We'll give you all that strength, muscle, and whatnot, and pass over all the singing,
but it is
skills.
so cool, though, man, people who can just sing, like just throw down sing. You're just like, wow, it's such an amazing gift.
Right. Well, so that was the story of Peter Francisco. I mean,
he
invited to parties, he'd break out in song. That was always,
That's so cool.
But you mentioned just a few minutes ago that he didn't have an education, and what's wild is that he falls in love with a girl, which we kind of alluded to, but her father was like, "Oh hell no, yeah! Look, what do you have to offer my daughter?"
That's right. And back in those days, man, you had to have something to offer, right?
Yeah. And think about it. Back in those days, if you didn't know who your mama and daddy were, like that was a big deal. Like inheritance, all of that.
Your heritage, your lineage, all of that. Yeah.
And he had none of that. He didn't know where he was from in his day.
Right.
He didn't know. He didn't know the Azor. He didn't know any of that. So here he is wanting to marry somebody, and her father was like, "You ain't marry my daughter." So what we see in real life, we actually see that he goes back to school. We actually see him in real life going to school for 3 years so that he could earn her hand in marriage, his girlfriend's hand in marriage.
Super cool.
So now, did they get married? You have to watch the show. That's all I can tell you. Look,
and he had also at this point won or earned, I guess is a better word, earned all this land,
right?
From fighting for so long.
Yeah. So, what's interesting? So, like he saved Colonel Mayo's life, we were talking about in the previous episode. But back then, you could ask for a pension from the U.S. government, obviously newly formed U.S. government, and say, "Hey, I fought in the American Revolution," and ask for a pension. Well, Peter Francisco, we see, obviously number one, didn't know how to read or write. So right after the American Revolution, number one, he probably didn't know you could get some land or get some sort of pension. But then later, we see that he gets an education, and what we do see is in about 1825 that he writes Congress, and so that is all recorded history. You can see what he wrote to Congress and asked for a pension. And so towards the end of his life, he was finally compensated for his time during the American Revolution.
That's amazing.
And then we see that he actually serves in the Virginia Senate. Right. So what's wild is when you unravel his story is here everything that was stolen from him, in terms of being kidnapped. And, as Francisco was on our program a couple episodes before from the Azores, he was talking about here, he was from a wealthy family in the Azores. So we know that. Like, he had silver shoe buckles. Like, back then, people didn't even wear shoes. Like, the little kids didn't wear shoes. But he came from a nice family. Well, we know.
Right.
All that's ripped from him. He's kidnapped. But then later in life, we see that so much of that is restored to him. Yeah. And he ends up being elected by his own peers in the Virginia Senate, which is pretty wild.
Yes. And still to this day, the longest funeral procession ever held for a Senate member, still to this day, is the longest, and it was paid for by the Virginia government, which is pretty wild. And in the Capitol building there, they have portraits of all the old sitting senators, I guess, and Peter Francisco's portraits up there in the Virginia House. And
yeah, if you go in Virginia, the Capitol building there, downtown Richmond, they have they renovated it, I don't know, 15 or so, 20 years ago, but beautiful, $200 million renovations, really gorgeous building that they have there. And if you actually go in and ask for the Peter Francisco painting, go to the main desk there, they'll take you to it. It's, if I remember right, it's in the West Wing, if I remember, but it actually sits right next to the Speaker of the House, Virginia's office. Right next to his door is a painting of Peter Francisco. Now, what's interesting is, to your point, I mean, think of 250 years of Virginia government, how many senators, congressmen there are, or have been. Now, obviously, you can't hang a picture of all of them, but still to this day, the Peter Francisco painting is hanging there. Matter of fact, so we had...
And also, they observe Peter Francisco Day. And several states do that. How many? 7?
Yeah, 7, 8. I think Rhode Island, I think, was still working on it. So 7 or 8.
So they actually observe Peter Francisco Day, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So we had Senator Ryan McDougal on the documentary I shot with the History Channel. And he kind of weighs in. He's still a senator in Virginia, still this day. Ryan McDougal, good friend and good fan of Peter Francisco. But he kind of weighs in on the Virginia government. So, Tim, roll that clip.
Peter Francisco lived till 1831. He died at the ripe old age of 71 years, which was a substantial period of longevity in that time. During the last 5.5 years, Peter was actually elected by the members of the Senate to be the Sergeant at Arms. Certainly an honor that is not held by many Virginians over the 300 years of our history.
The Peter Francisco portrait was for many years in the governor's mansion. It was part of the governor's mansion collection. And this particular portrait of Peter Francisco was chosen to hang outside the office suite of the House of Delegates Speaker.
In 1973, the legislature, both the House and the Senate unanimously, passed a resolution appointing Peter Francisco Day of March 15th and each year preceding, and to recognize the accomplishments and the life of Peter Francisco and what he meant to Virginia and to the Revolution.
So, obviously, then, like you mentioned, that the Virginia government, and Ryan McDougall talks about this in that clip, but the Virginia government pays for the funeral. And he's buried downtown Richmond. We've been there.
Yes, been there. Been to his gravesite. We've taken a few members of the team along the way there. Got an epic shot of me kind of looking at his gravesite that I love that shot.
Yeah, we'll put that out on social media. That's a really cool shot of Brian looking out over his gravestone.
Yeah, it was super neat to see where he's buried and man, just how obviously how impactful his life was to so many people to still be standing in such great honor today.
Yeah, I know. And again, you think of how many Revolutionary War heroes there were. Mm-hmm. But were they buried in a nice grave? I mean, this was this graveyard. There's a lot of different famous people. Edgar Allan Poe was buried there. There's a lot of different famous people. And here, they took care of Peter Francisco, a Revolutionary War hero and giant of his day, which I think is cool. I mean, that how many had that kind of honor, if you will.
Yeah.
But Peter did. So, we'll continue the journey.
That's right.
With our film and all that in the next episode. So we'll get back to making this series.
That's right.
And bringing them to life.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Luso the Journey. If you're interested in following us, consider subscribing. Hit that button right down below. If you really want to check out the entire series, hit the playlist and you can unpack more of the journey.